Hello and welcome to this Friday edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. As usual, we have a packed show for you. Lots coming up in the next 1 hour. Our top focus is on Pakistan. Alright, former Pakistan Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif is all set to end his self-imposed exile and return to his country next month ahead of the general elections. Pakistan's outgoing Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has said his brother will return to Pakistan next month to face his pending court cases and lead the party's campaign for the general election. In an interview with Geo News, Shehbaz Sharif said he would travel to London soon to meet his elder brother Nawaz Sharif. Pakistan's National Assembly was dissolved 2 days ago and a caretaker government and interim Prime Minister will soon take charge. Significantly, Shehbaz Sharif has reiterated that his elder brother would be Pakistan's Prime Minister for the fourth time if the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz PML-N wins the next election to be held later this year or early next year. Now, his statement came as the process to appoint a caretaker setup formally kicked off with the dissolution of the National Assembly on Wednesday, 3 days ahead of the mandated period. Shehbaz Sharif said Nawaz will neither wear a hat nor a bucket. Well, a jibe really at Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf chairman Imran Khan, who dons a bulletproof helmet during his court appearances. 70-year-old Imran Khan was recently sentenced to 3 years in jail by an Islamabad court in the Toshkhana corruption case for unlawfully selling state gifts during his tenure as Prime Minister. He was subsequently arrested by the Punjab police from his residence in Lahore. Khan, who is currently lodged in the ad hoc jail, has appealed his conviction and the 3-year prison sentence in the Islamabad High Court. Speaking about his meeting with opposition leader Raja Riaz to deliberate on the interim Prime Minister's name, Shehbaz Sharif said it is hoped that the name of the caretaker Prime Minister will be agreed upon within 3 days. Under the Constitution, the Prime Minister and the opposition leader have 3 days to finalize the name of the caretaker Prime Minister. In the first round of consultations on Thursday, they failed to reach a consensus on a name. It has been decided that there will be another round of talks. The statement indicating that both sides are keeping their cards close to their chest. Now, Shehbaz Sharif said he will consult brother Nawaz Sharif regarding the appointment of a caretaker Prime Minister. Shehbaz, who is also the PML-N president, hopes that his party will win the next general election, and he says he will then work as an activist of the party under the Nawaz Sharif-led government. Even though, as per the Constitution, the elections should be held within 90 days, the polls are expected to be delayed by a couple of months as new census results have been approved, which makes it a constitutional obligation to carry out delimitation before the elections. The Election Commission of Pakistan is bound to carry out delimitation within 120 days and then announce the election schedule. Now, coming back to the big development about Nawaz Sharif. The 73-year-old former Pakistan Prime Minister has been living in self-imposed exile in the United Kingdom since November 2019. He was convicted in the Al Azizia Mills and Avonfield corruption cases in 2018. The 3-time Premier was disqualified by the Supreme Court in 2017 over the Panama Papers case. The PML-N has repeatedly contested that Nawaz was unjustly disqualified. Nawaz Sharif was serving a 7-year jail term in a Lahore jail before he was allowed to proceed to London in 2019 on medical grounds. It was in 2016 when Nawaz Sharif stepped down as the Prime Minister after the Supreme Court disqualified him for life for allegedly concealing assets. His appeals against the conviction are currently pending in various courts in Pakistan. After being exiled by General Pervez Musharraf in 1999, Nawaz Sharif returned to Pakistan, but on his arrival at the Islamabad airport, he was arrested and sent to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia to complete the remaining 3 years of his exile. Later, Nawaz was sentenced to 10 years in prison for corruption by the National Accountability Bureau, along with his daughter Maryam Nawaz. After 2 months of imprisonment, their sentences were suspended by the court pending a final judgment by the High Court. In 2018, Sharif was given a 7-year sentence for the ownership of steel mills in Saudi Arabia, and he was jailed again. But he was allowed to leave the country for medical treatment in November 2019, and he has not returned to Pakistan since then. Ever since the PML-N came to power after Imran Khan's ouster in April last year, there has been talk of Nawaz returning to Pakistan, and there has been speculation about him in fact contesting once again for the premiership in this year's general election. But now his brother, the outgoing Prime Minister, has made it official. All right, for more on this story, let's now go across to Ramakrishnan Sridharan, consulting editor with News9, who joins us live once again from Washington, DC. Great to have you back this Friday evening, Shri. Very interesting developments taking place in Pakistan over the last few days, and fast-paced ones as well, if I may add. You've had Imran Khan going to jail, you've had the National Assembly being dissolved, and now what was being spoken of in whispers seems to have been made official by the outgoing Prime Minister of Pakistan, who says his brother and the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif is all set to end his self-imposed exile and will return to Pakistan as early as next month. He will in fact lead the ruling party's election campaign, and if all goes well, Shehbaz Sharif is hoping that Nawaz will return as Prime Minister. How should we see these developments, and what is Nawaz Sharif's return likely to really mean for Pakistan's politics, the upcoming election, and for the electoral prospects of his party?
Right. So not a dull moment in Pakistan politics, isn't it, Neha?
Never.
Well, let's start by looking at Mr. Nawaz Sharif's current status. He is a man who went to London on medical grounds on bail, and he has violated the bail conditions by not returning to Pakistan, and he has officially been declared as an absconder by a Pakistani court. So he's an absconder right now. So when he comes back to Pakistan, when he comes back and sets his foot, let's say at the Lahore Islamabad airport, he first has to face the courts, because the question of what happens to his pending trial and the pending sentence, and the fact that he violated his bail term will come up. That's the first issue that needs to be settled by Nawaz Sharif before he can actually aspire for any kind of a political post. Had this been the old Pakistan, I would have said he would probably will return only when everything has been managed, and he's fairly sure of let's say a lenient treatment by the judicial system in Pakistan. But if you look at what's been happening in Pakistan over the last several years, including the imprisonment of the former Prime Minister Imran Khan, I think the judicial system in Pakistan has become stronger. It has grown a spine, slightly independent of the military. So how will the courts treat Mr. Nawaz Sharif when he comes back is the first big question. So unless Mr. Sharif gets some sort of a clarity on that count, I don't think he's going to be in a hurry to come back. This could just be political posturing by the Sharif family on Nawaz Sharif's return. And unless they have some sort of assurance from the judiciary or from the military, which is going to remain the kingmaker in Pakistan and the power behind the throne, I don't think the former Prime Minister of Pakistan is going to risk imprisonment in Pakistan, given his health condition, as he says. But let's not discount Mr. Nawaz Sharif's political machinations, because as we know, he has been the longest serving Prime Minister of Pakistan. Of course, not in a continuous fashion. He's held office in 3 different terms, non-contiguous terms. And all 3 times he was ousted from office and he managed to come back. So the first time it was by a military leader, second time it was by a president, and then it was by the court recently. So who's to say that when Mr. Nawaz Sharif tries to come back for the 4th time, he may not eventually become the Prime Minister of Pakistan, because politics can be strange. And if he's able to manage the military and the judiciary, he might as well come back and be able to lead his party into an election. And if Imran Khan's PTI is not is in a, let's say, an enfeebled or a weakened state, and Imran Khan is in prison, it's quite likely that Mr. Nawaz Sharif may become the Prime Minister once again of Pakistan, Neha. So lots up in the air. It largely depends on whether he gets support from the judiciary and the army to stake a claim again to become the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Neha.
All valid points, Sri, but of course, as they say, especially in the context of Pakistan politics, all bets are usually off, as they should be, because you just never know what kind of backroom deals may have been negotiated. And let's not forget that Nawaz Sharif's bête-noire, Imran Khan, is currently behind bars, so in a sense out of action. All right, we have a packed segment with you, Shri. Lots of stories today from the United States, which is where you are. So give me just a moment. I will come back to you to discuss the next set of stories. All right, moving on to our second story on Global Lens tonight. US prosecutors have asked a federal judge to begin former President Donald Trump's trial on charges of trying to overturn his 2020 election loss to Joe Biden on the 2nd of January 2024. Now, if US District Judge Tanya Chutkan agrees, the case against Trump, the early frontrunner for the 2024 Republican presidential primary, would open right before the anniversary of the January 6 riots at US Capitol, which were fueled by Trump's false claims about the election. The proposed date is also just under 2 weeks before the first votes are set to be cast in the Republican presidential race, with Iowa's first in the nation caucuses scheduled to be held on the 15th of January. Now, Donald Trump pleaded not guilty to charges that he conspired to overturn the results of the 2020 election when he appeared in a Washington court that's located just blocks away from where a rampaging mob of his supporters stormed Capitol Hill in an effort to keep him in power. Trump, the 45th president of the United States, is in fact the 1078th accused in this particular case. Trump has been charged with conspiring to block the US Congress from carrying out its work on 6 January, confirming Joe Biden's election, and successfully obstructing the vote confirmation by directing his supporters to the Capitol. He is accused of scheming to disrupt the election process and depriving Americans of their right to have their votes counted. Now, Trump has said this is the persecution of the person who is leading by very, very substantial numbers in the Republican primary and leading Biden by a lot. So, if you can't beat him, you persecute him or you prosecute him. We cannot let this happen in America. That is how Trump reacted to his indictment. Trump also faces 3 upcoming trials in New York. A civil trial in October over allegedly fraudulent practices in his real estate business. A second civil trial in January in which he is accused of defaming a woman who accused him of rape. And a criminal trial in March in which he is accused of falsifying records to cover up payments to an adult film actress. Charges are also expected to be filed in Georgia, where a grand jury is investigating efforts to subvert the 2020 election results in that state. Let's now look at this particular indictment of Trump in some detail. The former US president and 2024 presidential hopeful, Trump's indictment for efforts to overturn the 2020 election has thrown America into uncharted waters. The irony is that Trump may not be allowed to vote next year, but the indictment does not in any way bar him from contesting the presidential election and seek another term in office. What happens, though, if Trump becomes president and later gets convicted? Many feared could trigger a constitutional crisis, as the US Constitution currently has no clear answers to such a question, simply because there is no precedent for this very complicated situation. For the first time ever, the United States is set to put on trial a former president for trying to destroy the country's democratic system and plotting to overturn the 2020 presidential election result. The 4 counts against Trump include conspiracy to defraud the US by employing dishonesty, fraud and deceit. Trump has been accused of spreading lies about election fraud. The charges follow an investigation into the Capitol Hill riots on 6 January 2021, when the very seat of American democracy was attacked and placed under siege by a rampaging mob comprising mostly Trump supporters. Now, the indictment by this Washington court says Trump was determined to remain in power despite having lost an election. He tried to remain in office and prevent the peaceful transfer of power. Prosecutors said that for 2 months after his election loss, Trump spread lies to create an intense national atmosphere of mistrust and anger and erode public faith in the administration of the election. So what do these developments mean and what can we really expect in the month of January? Let's find out from Shri. Shri, I've said this on the show earlier, Trump has a packed and a very complicated calendar for 2024. Lots of trials coming up. But if the prosecutors in this particular case have their way, Trump could actually go to trial as early as the 2nd of January next year. We don't know what view the judge is going to take. Of course, the final decision is still awaited. But if that does happen, as I mentioned, it will really be very significant at multiple levels, given that it will come on the anniversary of the January 6th Capitol riots, and very crucially for Donald Trump and his rivals, it will come just 2 weeks ahead of the Republican presidential primary that essentially kicks off the US presidential election for the Republican Party. How significant do you think that is likely to be, and are things likely to pan out this way?
So Neha, if Mr. Trump is fighting this tooth and nail, it's obviously because everything depends on his ability to be out there connecting and campaigning with people. Now, if he's going to be tied up in a court battle and court appearances, then he'll not be able to go out and campaign. So now this is essentially a fight between the Special Prosecutor's Office, Jack Smith, who obviously realizes the importance of the case. This is a unique, unprecedented kind of a case brought against a former president of the United States. So the Special Prosecutor's Office is keen that this case be brought to a logical conclusion as quickly as possible. Now, as far as Trump and his legal team is concerned, they obviously see this creating a problem for them in their campaign trail starting January. And they want it to be held, the trails to be held only after the election is over. Now, here's where the judge, who is Tanya Chutkan, who's going to be deciding on the trial date, this is what she's going to look at. She's not going to care about the fact that Trump is a presidential nominee or is trying to run for the president of the US once again. But she may give a greater weightage to Trump team's statement that a January 2nd date does not give them enough time to prepare their case. So that is a far solid and a stronger argument for the Trump team to make than to say that our candidate, our client, will not be able to contest or like campaign properly if he's asked to appear in court starting January first week. Now, because from the court's point of view, Mr. Donald Trump is just another individual. It doesn't matter that he was a former president, because in the eyes of the law, a former president and an ordinary citizen get the same equal treatment. So, but the consequences for Mr. Trump are very, very severe, and the stakes are very high, which is why Mr. Trump has also been ranting against Jack Smith and even the court and the jury on his social media platform, Truth Social, and he in fact called the Special Prosecutor Jack Smith a lunatic. Now, these kind of comments, I think, in my opinion, are not going to really help his case in front of the judge, Neha.
Well, many would say that's just Trump being Trump. All right. So, thanks for that, Shri. Of course, it will be very interesting to see if things actually do turn out this way. What impact will all of this have on the 2024 US presidential election? I think that really is the question that will be uppermost on everyone's mind. Let's now move on to our next story, Shri, and we'll be back with you in just a moment. Amid already strained ties between the United States and China and a war of words on multiple fronts, US President Joe Biden seems to have set the cat among the pigeons yet again. This time, Biden has expressed grave concern over China's economic crisis and called to the country a ticking time bomb. According to Biden, China's demographic and economic problems could be a threat to the rest of the world. At a political fundraiser, Biden said China is in trouble because growth has slowed and the number of people at retirement age outnumber those of working age. But controversially, Biden, while mentioning that China has the highest unemployment rate, going at it, and I quote, "That's not good because when bad folks have problems, they do bad things." And in the same breath, Biden insisted that he was seeking a rational relationship with China. He said, "I don't want to hurt China, but I'm watching." The comments are some of the most alarming yet that Biden has made about America's chief geopolitical rival. The president has sought to walk a fine line between deterring China's controversial economic practices and aggression in the South China Sea while achieving a diplomatic rapprochement with Chinese leaders and put a floor under relations. Biden said Washington isn't looking for a fight with Beijing, but is closely watching its activities. For example, he dubbed China's Belt and Road Initiative, Belt and Road Infrastructure Finance Initiative, debt and news because of the terms that the countries must accept in exchange for the money that China offers. And that's not all. The Biden administration this week released a long-awaited curb in U.S. investments in China, but the policy was pared back from initial drafts amid the president's efforts to improve ties with the Chinese government. Now, China's economy was expected to soar in 2023 after the country lifted its draconian COVID-19 protocols, which were amongst the strictest in the world. Instead, the country's $18 trillion economy is facing challenges across the board, such as weakening consumer spending, slowing exports, high youth unemployment, and a slumping property market, highlighted by a debt crisis for County Garden Holdings, once the country's largest private sector developer by the sales. The company is in danger of defaulting amid an industry cash crunch. Investors are already pricing in a likely default, and Country Garden was downgraded 3 notches on Thursday by Moody's Investors Service. China's gross domestic product grew at a slower than expected pace of 5.5% in the first half of this year compared with a year earlier. Much of the world's production depends on China, leading to worries about ripple effects for the global economy. The problems also come at a delicate time as the US is working to de-risk from Beijing, finding ways to reduce its reliance on Chinese supply chains and challenge the country's dominance in areas like green technology and semiconductors. Beijing has seen Biden administration's efforts to restrict critical technology investments as moves to contain and isolate the country as it deals with the slowing economy, undercutting US efforts to reset the relationship after a rocky stretch. A series of incidents in recent months, including an alleged spy balloon and military encounters in the South China Sea, have heightened tensions between the two sides. Several high-level US officials have traveled to Beijing recently to smooth ties. But tensions, of course, still persist. Those visits have yet to deliver significant public results beyond the two sides agreeing to further dialogue. Besides, some of Biden's recent remarks have certainly not helped matters and in fact added fuel to the fire. His latest remarks are reminiscent of comments that he made at another fundraiser in June when he referred to President Xi Jinping as a dictator. China called the remarks a grave provocation. The comments seriously violated China's political dignity. That's what the Foreign Ministry of China said. So what exactly had Biden said? He had said, the reason why Xi Jinping got very upset in terms of when I shot that balloon down with 2 boxcars full of spy equipment in it was because he didn't know it was there. That's a great embarrassment for dictators when they don't know what happened. That wasn't supposed to be going where it was blown off course. Okay, to understand this story better, we will go back to Shri in just a moment, but before that, let's play out this soundbite for you.
That's part of the American dream, and that's Bidenomics. It's rooted in what I've always worked best in this country, investing in America, invest in Americans, because when we invest in our people, when we strengthen the middle class for stronger economic growth, that benefits everybody. The poor, the wealthy, everybody. And for the longest time, we've been told to give up on American manufacturing, that it can't happen again, and we just can't do it anymore. Well, as you might have noticed, I've never believed that.
Okay, let's go back to Shri. Shri, there is no doubt, and we discussed this on Global Lens just yesterday, that there seems to be a growing economic crisis for China. It has slipped into deflation. Youth unemployment seems to be at an all-time high. And yes, this sort of an economic slowdown could certainly have a cascading effect for the rest of the world. However, when the most powerful man in the world, the President of the United States, calls the President of China a dictator, and now says, oh, this is bad because bad folks do bad things when they're in trouble. My question to you simply is Joe Biden working overtime to needle China, even as he insists that he wants better ties with the country? What's going on here?
So first off, Neha, I don't think President Biden is factually incorrect on any count. Well, China is facing a tremendous slowdown, and as a country which runs with an iron dictatorial hand, any reversal in the fortunes of the common man, people who have seen dramatic improvement in their own incomes and prosperity levels over the last 3 decades, if that starts reversing, then China is potentially looking at a huge human problem, a social strife that will be very difficult to manage, and which may ultimately end up challenging Xi Jinping's grip on power and the Communist Party's hold on the country. So these are very serious issues, and President Biden, of course, has a whole lot more information than you and I do on what's really going on inside China. So I don't think he's wrong on any count. That said, it's also a fact that the US-China relations have touched possibly the lowest point since 1979, when the two countries first started talking. So this, in that sense, is a continuation of that trajectory where US is moving away from China and to maybe a country like India, which it sees as a far more democratic and a far more a country with better prospects and something which is more neutral, right, and not a threat to America's position and power in the world, and an ally in that part of the region. So that shift is absolutely happening. And the other thing which is at play here, Neha, to my mind, is the fact that the Republicans have actually gone after the President Biden, saying that he has been soft on China. I mean, despite all that, the orders which he has signed, starting with October last year and the one day before yesterday, so they have been keeping the heat on President Biden, saying that you haven't been vocally critical of China enough. And don't forget, there are elections coming up, and President Biden has to show himself at least as being strong publicly. There are, of course, moves happening at the administrative level where more and more pressure is being put on China. The noose is tightening around China to make sure that the unfair advantage, in some sense, which China has gained over the years in terms of the theft of intellectual property and the continued espionage which China has been carrying on in the US and other parts of the world, China doesn't do that anymore. So this is something which President Biden is trying to do, and to counter the perception and the allegation from his rivals that he is soft on China. But that said, China is witnessing a perfect storm. I think the best days of China are over, and things are going to be very difficult for Xi Jinping and his political party when it comes to ensuring that people have employment and the prosperity which people have now gotten used to, it continues over the next decade or so. So these are big challenges, and it can be termed as a ticking time bomb, Neha.
A ticking time bomb indeed. But, as you mentioned, since Biden feels the need to appear tough on China in the run-up to the presidential election, I really wonder if we'll more than once hear him refer to Xi Jinping as a dictator. That would be interesting. Thanks for that, Shri. Coming back to you in just a moment to discuss our next story. 5 Americans who had been imprisoned in Iran are now under house arrest, the first step in a deal between the US and Iran that would include making $6 billion in Iranian funds more accessible to Tehran in exchange for their return to the United States. Now, 4 of these Americans and a 5th who hasn't been identified are all currently under house arrest. That has in fact been confirmed by the White House. The move sets the stage for a process that, if all goes well, could ultimately see the 5 men being freed altogether and allowed to return to the US. Washington officials say it's an encouraging step, noting that there is a roadmap that has basically been agreed upon. However, they say that there are a number of steps that still need to be worked on in the prospective deal to bring the Americans home to the United States, and they add that there are no guarantees. A spokesperson for the White House's National Security Council confirmed that the Americans have in fact been released into house arrest. In a statement, they said while this is an encouraging step, these US citizens should never have been detained in the first place. We will continue to monitor their condition as closely as possible. Of course, we'll not rest until they're all back home in the United States. Negotiations for their eventual release remain ongoing and are delicate. We'll therefore have little in the way of details to provide about the state of their house arrest. Now, in a separate statement, State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said, "We continue to monitor these individuals' health and welfare closely. We continue to work diligently to bring these individuals home to their loved ones. They must be allowed to depart Iran and reunite with their families as soon as possible. If the Americans are ultimately allowed to leave Iran, the Biden administration is expected to then approve the release of, as we said, approximately $6 billion worth of Iranian assets held in a restricted account in South Korea due to US sanctioned laws. The US would likely mandate that the money go towards humanitarian causes, though it's not clear how the Biden administration can actually enforce such a condition. There's also expected to be a prisoner swap component to this entire deal, though officials maintain no prisoners held in the US will be released in exchange for these Americans moving to house arrest. The permanent mission of the Islamic Republic of Iran to the United Nations said in a statement, as part of a humanitarian cooperation agreement mediated by a third-party government, Iran and the US have agreed to reciprocally release and pardon 5 prisoners. The transfer of these prisoners to out of prison marks a significant initial step in the implementation of this agreement, they said. Remember, there have been no formal diplomatic ties between the United States and Iran since 1980, and all official communications are conducted through indirect channels. It would also be the first time that Tehran has approved a mass release of US detainees since early 2016, when a prisoner swap coincided with the implementation of a landmark nuclear deal. According to reports, these negotiations were brokered primarily by Oman and Qatar, with the UAE, Iraq and Switzerland also providing assistance. All right, so the question really is, what does this really mean? And what happens next, especially as far as those $6 to $7 billion worth of assets that were frozen as a result of sanctions on Iran mean. Let's take a look at some of the reactions that have come in before we discuss this with Shri.
Let me be clear about a couple of things, though. In any event, in any respect, Iran will not be receiving any sanctions relief. And in any instance where we would engage in such efforts to bring Americans home from Iran, Iran's own funds would be used and transferred to restricted accounts such that the monies can only be used for humanitarian purposes, which, as you know.
All right, let's go back to Shri to discuss this further. Shri, it's almost a done deal that these 5 Americans are currently under house arrest, and there are very strong chances they'll be allowed to return to the US very soon. We heard Antony Blinken there acknowledging that $6 to $7 billion that currently lie frozen as a result of sanctions on Iran will be unfrozen. But you know, on the issue of prisoner swap, the US seems to be, shall we say, very cautious, because at the moment they seem to be denying that that is really part of the deal. But Iranian officials, on the other hand, are quite clear that there will be a prisoner swap as well. What more do we know, really, about the contours of this deal that has been struck?
Well, Neha, Iran can do and ask for whatever it wants, but I think the US is very clear that apart from the money which gets released, there'll be no prisoners, Iranian prisoners, especially if they are accused of terrorism or any act against the interests of the United States of America. I don't think any of them are going to get released. I don't think, as far as the US is concerned, that's even part of this negotiation It's only the money, the $6 to $7 billion, which are in South Korean banks, which will get released. But let's look at what's really happened here. Ever since the nuclear deal fell through and America came out with sweeping sanctions against Iran, the country has been fighting with its back to the wall, and it desperately needs the money which is locked up in South Korean banks, again thanks to US sanctions. So South Korea could not release that money without America's approval. So now if US is agreeing to release that money, at least gives Iran some breathing space. And Iran, on its part, has actually been incessantly creating leverage for itself ever since the sanctions came along. For example, the 5 Iranian Americans who have been imprisoned, I don't think they really are, spies or whatever allegations that Iran is making. They are basically, pieces of, they are pawns basically in a game of chess that Iran is playing at the geopolitical level, where it has systematically used foreign citizens as a negotiating tool. If you remember, they also seized a South Korean oil tanker and held it captive for several months before releasing it in 2021. So these are things which Iran is doing to get back at the US and with a limited leverage. But when it came to the lives of people and the fact that these are by and large innocent business people who have connections with Iran and went there for business purposes and were then imprisoned by Iran as part of its large geopolitical attempted leverage. And now we have elections again coming up in the US. So this would be a good story for President Biden and to tell the voters here that US has brought back home 5 of its citizens. So that's a good, happy story, which definitely would help the Democrat Party's narrative and President Biden's push in for the elections, Neha. But I don't think US is going to relent on any other issue, especially on any prisoners who may be here on various accusations or crimes that they have committed against the United States, Neha.
All right, interesting. But it's a happy story indeed for the United States, a happy story for Biden going into that election year. On that note, thank you so much, Shri, for your time, patience and perspective, and have a great weekend ahead.
Thank you, and same to you, Neha.
Thank you. All right, on that note, a quick break here on Global Lens. Don't go anywhere. Lots more on the other side.